If you or someone you know has diabetes, you may have built up an extra supply of test strips and lancets. That's where we come in. We'll buy the supplies that you don't need and resell them to those in need to prevent waste. Help us make diabetes management more affordable. Visit us at teststripswithaz.com.
We have Trey Ogden on the program. He will face Nick Browne in the main event of LFA 76 next Friday night. How are you, Trey?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So back at it in 9 days, main event fight against Nick Browne. How are you feeling as we're getting closer and closer to this one?
I'm feeling great, man. My body's cooperating well. I'm very injury-free. And I was just thinking about it today. I'm healthier. I healed more in my fight camp than I acquired damage, and that's a definite first for me. So feeling really good. Feeling excited about that.
You're just doing my research and doing my homework and reading different pieces of content that you were a part of. Your martial arts journey, at least compared to the vast majority of fighters that I've spoken with in the past, it began from like a different place in a lot of them. It began from a place of necessity, really. I believe those are your words. You didn't want to be bullied.
Sure.
You wanted to learn how to defend yourself. And I was reading that you had began to learn more about the samurai culture. What about the culture? What about martial arts in general took you from, man, I need to learn how to fight. I need to learn how to defend myself to this is now a big part of my life. This is kind of embodying who I am as a human being.
Yeah. Great question. So when I figured out, I started martial arts probably around 12, and before I had a driver's license, long before, so not long, maybe 14, 15, I knew for sure that like this is what I wanted to do with my life. And so out of necessity, at that time I got into martial arts because I was getting picked on, and I was a smaller kid, and so I got into martial arts because I really felt that I needed to know how to fight. And but then you can imagine I didn't really like school at all. So like the thought of college or the thought of more school to me was like just in the way, because I had fallen in love with martial arts. So it was like that was just going to be in the way of martial arts. So I had made that decision at a very young age, and then through that, it was still, the UFC was still very new, so I was immersed in the traditional martial arts, and that got me kind of into the Eastern philosophy, and then like I stumbled upon the samurai, and so it was just like kind of became my way of life right away, in a sense, or what I admired. That was who I was looking up to,
It's fascinating stuff. I mean, reading upon it, like it would take me a lot longer to read than like 15 minutes, but just like reading some of the culture and some of the different things that the samurais do, I could see why, it would take a certain special person to embody that and take it as their own because of the discipline and everything about it. What specifically about the samurai culture did you take the most from in terms of getting your life to where it is now?
To say that I've like embodied the samurai, like I definitely haven't. I've tried, but that's such a high standard, of like of being. But I think that is exactly what I took from it is that they were utterly committed to this extremely high standard of being in all ways. Like the samurai weren't just savage warriors; they also wanted to be educated. They wanted to be philosophical or spiritual, and so it was just a very holistic, like kind of approach to like using the warrior path or whatever to elevate your own being to the highest that you possibly could. And I think that kind of ethos is what I took from it the most, and into my approach, just in the way that I don't view MMA as a sport. Like I view it as a discipline and a pursuit. So I don't train like for fights. I train for life. I train year round. So I approached MMA not from an athletic background, but from more of that background. Like traditional martial arts always taught that was a way of life. They always had a philosophy, or the dojo had like a code. Like every dojo had like a little ethos or whatever you had to memorize and like whatnot. So it was kind of like, I think that is what I brought the most.
In terms of your MMA career, you've been on this just wild tear for pretty much your entire career. the last 4 years specifically, but your kryptonite has been one guy. It's Thomas Gifford, who's now in the UFC. I mean, 2 fights in 7 months, both ended the same way in the same round, which is pretty crazy. I mean, you've obviously, with everything that you've learned and that you've taken away from all these different things in martial arts, you've been able to bounce back and beat literally everybody else. But being on such a great run, to run up against a guy like that and get stopped in the same way in both fights, like what did you take away from those fights? How did you grow from those fights?
Right. Well, these techniques work, and I'm human. And so that's one thing is, I've won a lot of fights by guillotine, and now I've lost twice to him via guillotines, live by the sword and die by the sword. And that's, that is the way of the samurai, basically. But so accepting that you're not always going to be like the champion of all champions of whatever, that's not real life, and that you're human, you can lose, and that you just have to carry on. Like, you learn what you learn from it, and then you carry on. So I think, I learned what I learned from the first one, and I got a lot out of the first loss. And then even though the fight basically went the same way in the rematch, I also learned a lot from that experience, but I have never really thought about it like together. Like, what did I learn from that, from fights together and the way that it happened? But, it's hard now because I've kind of passed it in a way. It's like, this is my third fight past that second fight. And so in my mind, it's like, I've just kind of closed that chapter and moved forward, It's just part of the story. It doesn't define you. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't be defined by any single performance. Especially not in martial arts, you're never going to go anywhere because this game's full of, it's a hard road, and it's full. Even in the gym, like, you're not going to win every round. There are no unicorns. Like, even the people that you think are the best in the world, they're losing rounds in the gym. It's just how it is, And so, yeah, man, it's just part of the game, and I've taken what's useful from it, but to define yourself by any single win or loss, I think, isn't useful, and in fact probably dangerous to your mindset.
I couldn't agree more with that. Now you get Nick Browne next weekend. Pennsylvania guys, he's 8-1, a tough, exciting guy. He's a finisher like yourself. Did you know a lot about Nick when you got the matchup?
No, I had never heard of him. And so I'm in the Midwest scene, he's in the East Coast scene, and so we have, I hadn't really known much about him, but I did get to know quite a bit about him. I researched him pretty thoroughly. So,
what have you learned along the way about Nick? Where do you see your advantages clearly lying in this fight next weekend? What are some of the things that you've taken away from your preparation?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously his grappling's really good. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu. My grappling, I'm probably mostly known for my grappling. So, but I think that the biggest advantage I have is that I put it all together more than he does. I feel like I'm more complete. I have a more thorough approach. And so, that's where my advantage lies, in the transitions, and make sure that I'm winning the transitions, the little micro transitions of the fight.
Is this the longest layoff you've had in your professional career? Like, typically,
I think so. Yeah,
you fight every 3-4 months, sometimes a little bit sooner, sometimes maybe 5 months, but it's been 7 months since you last competed. Is it more because you're having difficulty just finding fights at this point?
Not necessarily. So all 3 longer layoffs in my career line up with the Contender Series. So I was in camp. I've been in camp for 5 months basically, because my name was out there for that, and that was a possibility, and it didn't happen, which is fine. But so that's why I had a layoff. I was in camp. I was in the gym. I was ready for a fight on any notice, and so, yep.
What are your
thoughts? I'm ready to get back in there. 7 months went fast, man. There was one day where I looked at James and I was like, man, I haven't fought. My fight was in February. It was time just flies, and we're like, man, we got to fight. And so that's why we went back to get a fight.
What are your thoughts on the Contender Series? Because, I mean, during the first season, I figure, kind of looking at your record and looking at what you've done so far, I figured based on your region, being one of those top guys in the region, you were a perfect fit for the Contender Series. Definitely in the first season, it was more of the regional golden gooses, so to speak. And now This season,
Yeah.
no disrespect to any of these guys, but you're seeing 4-0 guys, 5-0 guys, 6-0 guys getting their shots, and it's just much different than it was in the first two seasons. Definitely the first season was more the veteran style thing. What are your thoughts on the Contender Series, and especially what we saw this year?
Yeah, so the first year I was 9-1. I believe I was 9-1 on a 7-fight win streak with 8 finishes. Like, god dang, man! I fought on all big shows. Fight pass cards, Bellator. I've never fought somebody with a losing record. Like, these were competitive fights. So that surprised me. But and then in the second season, it was kind of like, it sounded like they were going to use me again, and they didn't. The second season wasn't quite like it is now. And this season, it's like it seems like they're looking for younger guys earlier in their career. Just like you said, like 4 or 5 fights in, which I don't understand where those guys go when they get in the UFC. Are they all just going to fight each other, or are you going to throw them to somebody who's had 6-7 fights in the UFC and 20 pro fights? What are your thoughts on it?
It's interesting. I mean, I've read different opinions on it. Some are saying like this is a way for the UFC to load up their roster with cheaper talent.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know. It could be. But again, we're seeing some more competition in the MMA space too. We're seeing Bellator make some moves. We're seeing ONE make some moves. So maybe this is the way of just grabbing these guys early, even if you put them under developmental deals.
I hadn't thought of that.
Like look at William Knight. I mean, William Knight is this absolute monster who you can market so clearly, but he's 4-0. He's 4-0. But
if people lose their marketability, if they start losing fights.
That's true.
And that's the thing that has to be considered is, like, what is ultimately the most marketable is to acquire fans over a longer period of time, which means you have to be able to stand the test of time. You have to be able to beat 90% of the people they're going to match you with in the UFC, or you're not going to be in the UFC. So it's hard, but what you said about them trying to snatch up talent early, that would kind of make sense. But then it's like, so what about the guys like me who are hanging out here, right on that line? They're not trying to snatch us up. It's like, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But,
I mean, there's also so many cards now. Like, I feel like, I don't want to say oversaturated, but there's just so many cards. Like, it was a 9-week stretch. They had 1 week off, and now they have 8 weeks in a row where they have cards. So I feel like all these opportunities are going to come in so many different ways. So let's think about it from your end. Do you feel like at this point in your career, like you shouldn't even need the Contender Series? Like, you should just get a shot at this point, even if it's a short notice fight. Would you prefer kind of getting a short notice, two week notice kind of a fight, or would you prefer to go on the Contender Series, have a 4 or 5 week camp and earn your way in that way? Like, as a professional fighter, what seems like the better path for you?
Well, what's interesting to your point is I'm being told basically that I'm more suited for a short notice UFC fight, that I don't need the Contender Series, that I'm past that,
Right.
But like, that's such a weird thing to hear as a fighter, because it's like, what do you mean? Like, that's a clear shot with a defined date. And I think that's the hard thing about the short notice, is it just is like, until it's you that gets called, it just doesn't even seem like there's no way to put it. It's not tangible almost, But that will be the route I get in, because I don't think that I'm going to be on the Contender Series. I don't think that's the direction they're going with the Contender Series. And so I think that my job is just to stay ready to make the weight on any notice. I've been ready to make the weight for 4 months on 3 days notice. So, which is good for me, because that keeps an edge on me,
Yeah, that's a great
no
way to look at it.
Because I think about it. I think about getting the call to somebody that I've watched them fight on the UFC, or maybe I'm a fan of them, on 3 days notice. And I'm like, if I got that call right now, would I be happy with my last 10 days?
That's a great way to look at it.
So that keeps the edge on.
But that edge has to continue, obviously, next weekend with Nick Browne.
Yep.
He's getting ready to step in there with you, LFA 76 headliner. How do you see this all going down?
Man, I think it's going to be a good fight. I'm excited. I haven't fought someone who's mostly a grappler in a couple fights, so I'm excited to change it up and get to do some of that. And I think it's going to be a fast-paced fight. I think, like I said, the fight's going to be one in the details and in the transitions, and it's going to be exciting. I know that. I do plan on a finish either way. No judges this time. One of us is going out.
training at Glory MMA with Kraus and guys like Grant Dawson. I mean, I've been interviewing Dawson for since he was like 18 years old. Seeing him in the UFC now is just crazy. You got Zach Cummings in there, who's just the wily veteran who just flies under the radar and keeps winning fights, and nobody ever notices it. It's crazy.
That's weird.
And many others, like, and you've been there for a while. You've watched this team grow, and you've grown along with it. Like, how great has that been to be a part of over the years?
It's awesome, man. I love it. I love going to the gym every day. It's the highest concentration of martial arts minds in the Midwest together, hammering this out every day. And so it's like a playground to me, and I get to work there. I teach the jiu-jitsu program. So that's been a really meaningful experience for me as well, and it's helped me develop it's made me better. I had to get organized to teach a class, and that helps you organize your stuff better and go over the details more and more. And so it's been an awesome experience. It's a great gym, and we're lucky to have this gym, because when I first started training, it was not like this. There wasn't MMA twice a day, every day at 6 different places in the city. There was MMA like 4 nights a week after karate class. Like, there was still very much in transition. And I remember the smaller gyms, and our jiu-jitsu coach was a white belt, and like, I remember those days. And so to get to walk into Glory every day is like, we're really doing this, and it's really exciting, man. It's what I hope to spend my life doing.
Trey Ogden back in action next Friday in the main event of LFA 76, taking on Nick Browne. You can watch all the action on Axis TV. Thank you for the time, man. It was great talking to you. Let the folks know where they can follow along via social media with you. Any shout-outs, anything else you want to get off your chest, the floor is yours, man.
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram, Trey_Ogden at Instagram. And I put all my sponsors and all that, training partners on there. But Native Hemp Co., Dakota Fight Gear, and Venom for this fight, and Glory MMA.
Thanks again, Trey. All the best to you next Friday night. It was great catching up with you.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.